Hello everyone, this is Wolcen, Lords of Mayhem. This is an ARPG, in the style of games like your Diablos, your Grim Dawns, your Path of Exiles, your Titan Quests, all of those games. And it plays quite similarly to how you would probably expect, but it does have some really interesting ideas of its own. This is a genre that I absolutely love. I know some people find it a bit too repetitive for them, and that's understandable. There is a lot of repetition in the genre, but I really, really enjoy it, and I've kind of been, attached to it ever since I played the first Diablo on a computer that definitely was not mine when I was younger, and realized that it was basically all of the roguelikes that I enjoyed playing and trolling BBSs for late at night, only in real time and with graphics. And I was kind of mesmerized by the whole thing. And then I smacked a skeleton and pants flew out, and ever since then I've been hooked. So how does Wolcen fare in the whole skeleton smacking, pants flying department? Well, I'm kind of in two minds about this one, really, because I've had a lot of fun with it. I've powered through the campaign in a weekend, basically, and it's got some really, really interesting ideas, which I'll get into in a second, but at the same time, it's also very buggy, and some of the bugs are, game-breaking level, and in my opinion, should absolutely not have made it this far, because this was a game that was in early access for, 4 years, I believe? And although I think it's, not reasonable to expect that just because a game is out of early access means that it can no longer have any bugs ever, that's obviously not going to be the case, especially with large launch day patches and things. It's going to have some instability, some bugs introduced, and those are going to be worked out over time. And in fact, since the release that has been happening, several of the bugs have been squashed already with patches. But I do believe it's reasonable to expect a certain degree of polish for a game that spent so long in early access, is now considered, done and released, and is charging $10 more than its early access period price. And in my opinion, Wolcen simply does not deliver on that level of polish. It still feels a bit undercooked in certain areas. But I want to start with the positive. So what is Wolcen exactly? It is, of course, as I mentioned, an ARPG. You click, you move, you kill things, you smack skeletons and pants fly out. It is pretty much how you would expect for a game of this genre, and it has some really neat ideas. One of the first ones is that you'll probably notice in the bottom right, there's that purple and yellow, I'm not sure why I forgot the word for yellow, gauge at the bottom of the screen there, and this is the resource system. It's kind of interesting because normally in games like this you have some sort of mana or a resource like that drains as you use it, and then you wait for it to refill and use it some more. But this has a sort of an opposition system. It's like dueling resources where you have willpower, which is the purple gauge, and as you use it, instead of draining and emptying, it actually drains into the rage gauge, which is the yellow part. And then if you just wait for a while, the rage will empty back into willpower, or you can consume the rage for melee attacks. The willpower is generally for spells and the like, and then rage is for your melee abilities. So you never really lose your resources, and instead you have this sort of dueling gauge that empties and fills at different amounts for different spells and different attacks, which is really cool. I've never really seen a resource system quite like that. I suppose that you could say it's a little bit like the way the Demon Hunter in Diablo 3 worked, but it's a little bit different than that, and it works for everyone. There are classes in this game, but this game uses a lot of mechanics that would be familiar to you if you've played Path of Exile, and that it's very much open to, there are no class restrictions, basically. It's open to building your character however you want. Every character can learn every skill and spell. Every character can equip every weapon and armor. There are no class restrictions, so that I like. And one of the other really cool mechanics of the game is its skill tree. It's got a very extensive skill tree that's not exactly a tree so much as it's a skill circle. It's like a big section of 3 concentric circles. And again, if you've played Path of Exile, you'll be familiar with that. It's not quite as, complex as the skill Yggdrasil thing from Path of Exile, but it is similar in how it works. And each sort of cluster of nodes on the skill tree, each section is color-coded and basically has a subclass. If you hover over them, it actually tells you what subclass it is. And they've even went so far as to putting in flavor text for the individual bigger nodes and stuff to sort of describe the class to you, which is a nice touch. And there are, I think, 21 of these clusters of nodes, 21 different subclasses on this skill tree. However, that is not really the interesting part. The cool part about it is these concentric circles, this sort of 3 rings, actually turn. You can do this at any time. You can just go into the skill tree, click the one you want to turn, and then just click these arrows to rotate it. And it'll rotate around in a circle. And you can use this to connect different parts of the skill tree to each other that weren't originally connected. Say there's a cluster on the very right end side of the skill tree that you really want to get to, but all of your nodes are in the left side. You can just click that 3rd ring, rotate it to the left until it aligns with the nodes that you have now. It's a really unique system. I've never seen a skill tree done this way, to where you can actually change it on the fly. You can respec as well, but you don't actually need to respec to rotate it. You can actually even just purchase nodes that you aren't actually able to take advantage of yet, that you're not actually connected to, which is unusual for a skill tree. You can just purchase like remote nodes and then just rotate it in place to the point where it will connect with all the others and activate. So you can actually have several different sort of builds, you could say, several different situational groups of nodes, only one of which is active at a time, and then you can just rotate the ones in that you need right now and then sort of disconnect the others and then connect the new ones in. So you have, instead of like a character build, you can actually have several different kind of takes on that character build and then just rotate these skill tree nodes into place whenever you need one particular bit instead of another one. That's really interesting, honestly. Like I said, I've never seen a skill tree that moves like that. I think I'd like to see this in more games. I'd like to see this whole flexible character build skill tree that moves kind of system in more places, because it's really, really neat, and it does open up a lot of avenues for character customization. This does have a ton of customization. Like I said, since there are no class restrictions or anything, you can really build basically whatever you want, and some of the unique systems in place, like this rotating skill tree and the way that the skill and spell customization works, makes for a lot more variety than you might be used to seeing in games like this. I did mention skill customization, and that takes the form of kind of like a mixture between Diablo 3 and Path of Exile's skills. So like Path of Exile, these skills are not tied to classes, and instead they are actual drops that you find in the world, and you can learn from there. So that means every character can learn every skill and spell if they want to. And also, like Path of Exile, when you have them equipped and actually gain experience from killing things, the skills will also get experience and will level up, which will increase their overall damage or healing or summon health or whatever it is that they do. It will sort of just make them better at it. And if you remember in Diablo 3, every skill had these 5 runes, I believe it was 5, that you could learn as you leveled up, and that would alter the behavior of the skill in some ways, sometimes minor, sometimes major. And this game sort of takes that and runs with it and makes an entirely different system out of it, to where every single skill has, I believe it's 16 of these different runes that you can learn. As you have the skill and level it up, it will learn more and more of these alterations, these runes, and it will get more and more of these points that you can sort of allocate to different combinations of runes. And they will alter the skill in anything from just, 10% extra damage or 40% extra crit chance, very simple stuff, to things that entirely alter the behavior of the skill, like changing its damage type entirely and making it able to inflict different status ailments and stuff like that, so that it very much alters the way that you would use it. You can start with something that's just a basic fireball, but after you level it up enough, you can end up with having it instead be like a rapid-fire, multi-chaining lightning dart thrower, basically. At that point, you've basically created an entirely different skill out of it, and in fact, you can create such a variety of different skills this way that they allow you to equip up to 3 duplicates of the same skill, each spec'd very differently, so that you can have different skills for different situations. That's also awesome. I'm a huge sucker for things that allow you to alter the skills that you have, because it just adds so much more variety to the gameplay, and it adds a lot more variety to the builds that you can make. That's why I love the support gem system in Path of Exile. That's why I love the fact that in Last Epic, every skill has its own little mini tree inside of it, and that's why I love this system here, because it adds so much. It makes sure that skills aren't really obsoleted, because instead of just getting too weak or whatever, you can simply change them to do something else, which is really awesome, and it makes every skill have very much its own sort of personality, and you're kind of excited when you learn a new one, not only because of what it can do when you first learn it, but because what it may be able to do later when you level it up. It's an awesome system that I really, really enjoyed using, and it definitely adds a lot to the combat, having all of these varying skills at your disposal. There's also a bit of a signature feature of the game, which is that golden meter in the middle. As you've probably seen by now, some transformations have been happening. You actually have these 4 different forms that you can transform into. Very much like a Devil Trigger style of thing. You build this up by just combat, and then you can spend it to transform into these big screen-clearing forms and do tons of damage. There are 4 different ones, and each one has its own sort of theme and its own element to its attacks. You will get your first one once you've beat the first act, and after that you can get points to unlock any of the others, so you'll be able to choose every time which one of the forms you want to unlock. I'm a big fan of the Infinity form. That's basically like a big mage that can fire off these homing, like magic missile style clusters, and also target enemies in range to sort of send instant hit beams at them and fire these big like orbs of energy that sort of pass through everything and explode, and it's a lot of fun. These forms are really enjoyable because they're huge and powerful, and they don't last very long, but they have a really big effect. They don't really need to last all that long because they hit really hard. They each have some really unique skills and a bit of a different mechanic to each of them that involves like resource generation for each one that works different depending on which form you're in, and they're really fun to use during boss fights and stuff to help clear out all the big ad waves and do tons of damage to the boss. They're a cool feature, and the fact that they're so powerful and have their interesting mechanics and things along with them helps to make them feel like less of a gimmick and more like a legitimately useful part of the gameplay. It also helps that you don't have to have this meter full to use them, and you can actually stop using it whenever you want. So it isn't like a one and done transformation. It's, like I said, more like Devil Trigger, where you can sort of build it up and use it as you wish, which again helps it feel like more of a mechanic instead of a gimmick. They're fun. I like them. They're super powerful, and they definitely change how your character works, for sure. Also, of course, very important in any ARPG is the itemization. How is the loot? Because that's like 75% of what the game is about. Well, the loot is pretty cool. Weapon types are one particularly important part of the loot because they will generally tell you what sorts of skills you can use, staves and catalysts for spells, swords and axes for certain things, hammers for other things, and that's, since there are no class restrictions, that's the main determination of what sort of skills you can use is what you're actually equipped with. And there are also your usual like rings, amulets, helmets. One kind of interesting part about it is it uses like the Morrowind system of asymmetrical loot. Although the boots are one piece of loot, you equip both boots at once. The arm, like gauntlets, and the shoulder equipment are separate, so you can actually equip 2 different gauntlets and 2 different shoulder pieces, which is fun, and of course helps with the stats, considering each one will have its own stats, and then like you can have a bit of a mix there of different things. There are also the rarities that you would generally expect. You have like your basic stuff, and then you have your magic, and then your rare things at blue and yellow, and then you have legendary, and then you have unique. Uniques are kind of like the Path of Exile form of unique in that they're really, really powerful, but often are kind of specific to certain character builds, and they also have oftentimes some drawbacks to them, like the unique amulet I've been using, which gives you like huge 45% boost in spell damage, which is massive, but also decreases your maximum health by a pretty significant amount. So obviously it's only going to be useful if you're a character that's using a lot of spells, and it has a downside, which is like my favorite type of unique, the kinds of things that are very, very strong, but only in particular situations, and often have some sort of cost to them. The uniques I've also seen involve some other pretty cool stuff, like the staff that I've just found recently, which is like a big lightning damage boost. Obviously, if you're not really into doing lightning damage, or you don't want to use a staff, it's not going to be that useful to you, but if you are into those things, it has some pretty cool effects, and drastically increases the like shock ailment damage and stuff. That's pretty cool. The game also has 9 different damage types, which I'm, for some reason, always a fan of damage types in games. I guess it's just because it's a bit more variety, They're split into 3 different sort of categories. You have material, which is like physical damage, rend damage, and toxic, and then you have your elemental, which is your fire, frost, and shock, and then you have occult damage, which is shadow, sacred, and ether. Each damage type has its own color, its own different ways of inflicting it, and its own status effect inflicted on a crit. So that's something to consider, because there are a lot of status effects with 9 different damage types, and they definitely do help to add some variety to the game. However, I feel like now it's probably the best time to talk about the bad. I did mention that as much fun as I've had, the game is quite buggy, and these bugs range from the very simple, probably easily patched a bit later after they become aware of them and work them out, like some stuck inputs, like spells continuing to cast after you've released the key, or continuing to attack a dead thing after you've actually released the click. That happens occasionally. Things like the right-click to sell function, sometimes picking up an item instead of selling it, which means if you just try and speed through selling things like you would probably want to in a game like this, you will end up only selling about half of your inventory and having to go back and do the rest of it more slowly. Those are just kind of small problems, though. Where it really gets hairy is where you get to some of the more major issues that I, myself, and several other people have encountered. Looking at the forums, I'm far from the only one that's encountered these. Like, for instance, some things that make it feel a bit undercooked, like some of the skill tree nodes not doing anything at all. Like the static transferal skill, which sounds really cool. In theory, it's kind of confusingly worded. It says that it ups your damage by 6% per charge, up to 6 charges, so presumably 36% damage. And then when you cast a spell, it consumes the charges and then ups the spell damage for twice the charge value. So presumably that would mean if you had 1 charge, you would do 6% extra damage, but if you cast a spell, it would up the damage by 12% of that spell, but consume the charge. And then, directly below that, in the same description, it says it will consume the charges but double the spell damage. So, first of all, which is it? Is it plus 12% damage, or is it plus 100% damage? Because that's a big difference. But no matter which of those conclusions you come to, it actually seems to do neither. In fact, it seems to do nothing at all. And searching on the forums, everyone else seems to have come to this conclusion as well. This is extra frustrating because it's one of those end of the skill tree nodes, like one of the big character-altering ones that you would expect to be very satisfying and very effective. You build up for several levels to this end of the ring node at the very edge of one part of the skill tree, but it doesn't do anything. It creates the charges, and it consumes the charges, but no damage seems to alter at all. All your damage numbers are the same, your tooltips don't alter at all, and the whole thing just seems to not make a difference whatsoever. So that is one of the problems I'm talking about when it comes with some of these skill tree nodes just not really working either as intended or at all. The other problem, though, is much, much bigger, because I wanted to show you some of the end game of this game, because it has, from what I've seen, some pretty cool elements, like a bit of a city building element and some neat unlocks, and the ability to unlock that final skill slot that you see locked in the bottom that's been tantalizing me the entire game. However, I can't get to the end game because I can't beat the final boss. And it's not because it's difficult, it's because it bugs out and doesn't work. This is not universal. There are plenty of people talking about the end game, so obviously many people can reach it, but I'm also far from the only person that has had this problem, because looking on the forums, a lot of other people have complained about it as well, and offered some possible solutions, but none of them seem to work for anyone. And in fact, they didn't work for me either. Basically, the final boss is a really, in my opinion, genuinely interesting boss fight. It's well made, it's mechanically very fun, and has almost like some raid-style mechanics in it. That's pretty cool. However, once it gets to the third phase, it freezes in place. The boss will not do anything, no story dialogue happens, no anything happens. The boss won't attack me, and I can't damage it. No damage numbers even pop up when I hit it. So what I've had to do is actually just quit back to the main menu and then restart the entire end sequence over from the very beginning multiple times, but no matter what I try, it always freezes on the third phase and I cannot complete the boss fight. One particular method that people have suggested that I try actually ended up making it worse. One of the more common ones you see is disable ether damage. And I have one source of ether damage, which is a legendary belt, so that was annoying because it made the fight much more difficult because it took off like a third of my damage. So the fight was a bit harder, but not only did this not fix the problem, it actually made the boss freeze in the second phase instead. So basically what I'm saying is, I can't in good conscience recommend that people actually go out and spend their money on this game, when in reality they may be getting something that simply doesn't work properly. I have had a ton of fun with it, and I think that its unique ideas, like the way the skill alteration system works and the way that its skill tree works, are super cool. And as a base game, just as in general, it is very fun. It's a really solid ARPG that I had a lot of fun playing. But it's just too buggy for me to recommend in good conscience, because I don't want people to spend their money on something and then get super frustrated when they can't even beat it, for instance. I would recommend keeping your eye on this one if you are interested in it, because, like I said, it's really solid, but keep an eye on changelogs, on patches and things like that, because they have been patching it, so they are aware of these problems. I just think that for a game that spent so long in early access, a lot of these problems should have already been worked out by now, and some of the more major ones will hopefully be solved soon. So, as of right now, the time recording this video, I can't recommend that you go out and buy it, but if you are interested, do keep an eye on it, because it's a solid experience. It just is too buggy right now. So that is Wolcen. I will link you in the description below this video to its Steam page, so that you can keep an eye on its changelogs and see if any of the problems that I have submitted have been addressed yet and things like that. It's good, and it just kind of makes me sad, because I've had so much fun with it, but it's just so buggy sometimes, and in the most frustrating of ways, that I simply can't recommend it yet. So thanks for watching. If you have any experience or anything to say about the game, then do feel free to do so below. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.